We have seen or heard them on stage, sublime in performance. What goes on in their minds? What lies behind the choices they make, the paths they choose? Here is a glimpse into an artist's mind, an exploration of an artist's journey, both in art and in life, with a treasury of insights. It is about who they become as they evolve into artists, their transformation through the struggles in that journey. Discover the human behind the artist.
To be an artist and to take care of one's mental and spiritual health in today's world, we are too informed, too accessible as well, less protected, and we are constantly being triggered. Our privacy is often invaded. We have our insecurities, we have a pettiness, but we also have empathy. It's such a complicated thing to be an artist. Both my parents are artists. My mother, she is a Koodiyattam dancer and teacher, and she was also very interested in research, and specifically research about the women's performance traditions of Kerala, but also around South India. And my father is again a Koodiyattam exponent, but he has also had a very eclectic kind of life. He has engaged with, outside of Koodiyattam, with Kathakali, with several ritual performance traditions of Kerala, contemporary theatre, so puppetry. So together they had this whole world of, they shared that passion, and I was born into that. And the time when I was born was very special also because, it was in the thick of their activity. So there was a big revival project of a traditional puppet theatre called Pava Kathakali. So exactly around, the time I was born and I was growing up. And similarly, my father's engagement with Koodiyattam, with our Guru Ammanur, Madhava, Chakyar, was, at a very intense period as well. And they were also, doing a lot of research on Nangyar Kutha and, finding out, and the revival work was going on. So I was really born into that very passionate atmosphere. And I definitely think that has had a very strong impact on me as a child. So my mother always says, already when I was 6 months old, they were really busy going to watch performances, meet artists, take interviews, document and so on. And they used to just take me along. When I was 6 months old, she used to take me to the Kuttambalam to watch Ashoka Vanigangam Koodiyattam, and I used to be just lying there, and she said, I don't know if this is true, but she used to say that when I, after that experience of watching several days of being in the atmosphere of Ashoka Vanigangam, I used to come back, and she says, I used to hum like a chant. But I do believe that, that the soundscapes and all of that definitely has shaped my sensibilities. My mother, she's a dance teacher. Because she used to teach at home, I used to just like be around in the class, and that's how I started, like around 3.5 years old. I just started to join like at the back. Like in every dance teacher's family, you'll see that the kids just like join the class like that. And then my mother took interest, and I remember when I was around 3.5, I had my first, she taught me some little dance that I performed in my nursery school or something. She started teaching me Mohiniyattam, and the very special thing is that she's also a poet. Like, she loves to write. She was really had a problem with teaching little children Shringara at a young age. So she used to write poetry that's suitable to teach children, little girls. And she wanted Mohiniyattam to be more than Shringara. But this is way back. Of course, Mohiniyattam has made a huge evolution now. But like the way she learnt it, and the way, in the early years, that was still the predominant thing. And she wanted to break that, cycle a little bit. And she wanted the language to be accessible to all kinds of, storytelling. And she always associated the movements, every movement, the way I learnt it from her, it all had to do with nature. And so she would say, like, move like when the wind blows through the paddy fields, that is the curvaceous movement you have to find. Or like, imagine like a banana leaf moving in the thing, or a river flowing, or the frog jumping. So she used to all work with a lot of these images, and that's how I got introduced into Mohiniyattam. And most of the songs that we danced were her own songs that she had written, that she felt was age appropriate, and she had composed. That was my first initial journey, and I did an arangetram around like 7-8 years old. And like, yeah, that was my introduction into the world of any kind of performance. And I continued to learn Mohiniyattam for many years, and I love it. But there was a stage when I had to let it go for at least a decade, because it was just too much for the body to handle two forms. And so I had to let it go, and it was a really painful thing with my mother. But eventually, now again, I practice, and that was a very emotional and difficult decision to make, but I had to make it. I'm sure that because it's the same body, mind, soul practicing it, there definitely is like a flow or a bleeding into each other. But one's conscious effort was to always keep them distinct. Having practiced Koodiyattam, I feel like abhinaya in Mohiniyattam becomes different for me. And having practiced Mohiniyattam, I think in Koodiyattam, when I need for certain characters like a lot of grace, a lot of like this elasticity in the movement, I'm sure that my Mohiniyattam energy definitely contributes. Like, even recently I was thinking about it. I was playing Vasanta Sena, who's a courtesan from the play Mritshakadigam, and I definitely think that the Shringara and like the being of the courtesan was definitely also informed by my Mohiniyattam background. So I'm sure that happens. But I can also remember that there was a phase in my life where I was very conscious that I would be judged because I practiced Mohiniyattam and other things as well, like theatre, and I went to Japan to practice other forms of whatever, and I was very conscious that I might be judged. But then once I just let it go, I was like, this is it, this is me. My initial training was with my father and with Guru Usha Nangyar. So she was the one who taught me all the basics. So that was, I used to study in Ooty. So that when I was here for vacation, 2-3 months in a year, I used to train with her. And when I was in Ooty and my father would visit, he would like brush up and like remind me of things I had to learn. And that was how I got initiated into the form. And when in Koodiyattam we have this system of Arangetam, which is different from forms like Bharatanatyam, where once you learn the Nitya Kriya, we call it the Nitya Kriya, it's actually the Purappadu, which is a long invocatory choreography with ritualistic dances and abhinaya and prayers. And once you learn this sequence, and you've practiced it well enough, you can do an Arangetram, which is actually a form of initiation. And then I remember I did my Arangetram when I was around 9 years old. And then my basics were all with Guru Shananyar, after which in my later teens is when or my mid-teens is when I started learning with Guru Ammanur Ashan. Again, during vacations, I used to have classes. And once I finished school, that's when I had the opportunity of learning full time with him for a few years with Guru Ammanur Ashan. Both my father and me, I think we would both agree on this, that what drew us to Koodiyattam initially was not the form, its antiquity or its significance in the theatre world or any of that. It was really the artistry and charisma of our Guru Ammanur Madhava Chakyar. If he was on stage, you could not take your eyes off. He had such a power to draw people, to whatever he was, doing. And I think for my father, that was his initial pull into Koodiyattam. So he, when he was young and he was, in doing other, art practices like theatre, Kathakali, notation and all kinds of other things, he happened to walk into a Kootambalam and watch a performance by Guru Ammanur Madhava Chakyar, and he describes the moment of when his life transformed, and he said he was watching Ashan, Guru Ammanur, just sitting in front of the lamp in character, and he just moved very slowly his eyes from up to down, in the character being in deep contemplation of something. And my father felt like just the power of that one single movement and the power of that deep thought was so transportive. Like he felt he was like completely transported into the world, the inner world of that character, and he said that was the moment he realized this master and the form itself had so much depth and potential. And that's when he let go of everything that he had been practicing until then and completely surrendered to a new art form. He was already in his late 20s then, and he started his whole journey with Koodiyattam and Ammanur Madhava Chakyar, very specifically that. I have a very similar experience as a child. I remember watching Ammanur Ashan performing Bali. And the death of Bali in Balivadham used to be like one of his masterpiece scenes. And I remember as a very little child being witness to a performance of the death of Bali and being so deeply moved at a very young age. I still have a memory of that performance. And then later, like just watching and being around this person was like, it did something to you. And that was really also my pull. The form itself, it has never been a very popular form. Koodiyattam didn't like emerge like suddenly. Like it is you can't really trace how it came about, but the history is like so many traditions almost converged to become this, and therefore the technique is very complex. And we say a word in Malayalam, dharshtyam. Dharshtyam means there is a majesty to everything, almost an arrogance, but not in a bad way. There is like a majesty to the form because it's gone through so many hands of practitioners, of scholars. It's intense. So it's never been a popular form because it doesn't entertain. It's rather, one should look at it as a knowledge system, and engaging with Koodiyattam, it should be a long-term engagement, like with many other traditions, of course, but you have always to understand more and more and more about it. So Koodiyattam, as we describe it today, we often describe it as a Sanskrit theatre tradition, but I like to look at it as more than that. You know, Koodiyattam is really a theatre tradition, a storytelling tradition that has had a long journey to come to what it is today, as we know it today. One very beautiful thing of Koodiyattam as we see it today is that it is a very interesting way in which the Margi and the Deshi have come together. So we have the mainstream tradition of Sanskrit literature, drama, and we have the Natya Shastra tradition. But really the technique of Koodiyattam, the aesthetics of Koodiyattam, the language, the vocabulary is very, very regional. It draws from the many ritual and folk traditions of the region. In many ways, you can't call it a tradition that's rooted in the Natya Shastra. There are many conventions that have come down with the Sanskrit drama and with the Sanskrit theatre tradition, but in many ways Koodiyattam actually goes against many of the things that Natya Shastra, for example, proposes. So it is an adaptation, it is a very regional adaptation of a mainstream tradition. So the way in which we adapt Sanskrit, a Sanskrit play into Koodiyattam is very unique. We don't perform the play the way the playwright probably intended, because the playwright starts with a Nandi and ends with a Bharatavakya, goes through an entire story through several acts and scenes. But Koodiyattam basically takes only one act of a huge play, and then that one act of a play becomes a performance that lasts several days. So it's really like deconstructed and like adapted into our way of storytelling, like really indulgent in details and elaborations, lots of interpolations. So we bring in things that like the playwright probably never imagined or intended. So we bring in lots of upakathas, lots of stories from other texts. The one act of a play becomes a whole, you know, like an event of several, that lasts several nights. So yeah. And Koodiyattam it's not only theatre, it's storytelling, and that storytelling comes both, it merges into the abhinaya of the play itself, but also separately storytelling is very important to both the actresses and the actors and the Nambiyar, the musicians. So each have their own tradition of storytelling. We have Chakyar Kuttu, Nangyar Kuttu and Pathakam. So yeah, storytelling is extremely important, and every character is both always a character but also a storyteller. So we are always going away from, you know, we are pausing the plot and always, you know, like making these journeys into other stories and coming back. The Sanskrit text is used in Koodiyattam because Sanskrit is not the spoken language in the region. A lot of people are well versed in Sanskrit at the same time. So how we do it is we chant, we have a very specific way of chanting Sanskrit text, and then we elaborate through gesture, and if it's storytelling, we explain in the regional language the story, but always the root or the seed is the Sanskrit text itself. So the musical accompaniment in Koodiyattam is very interesting. It's like we have several performance traditions, but Koodiyattam is the only tradition where we use a very special drum. It's called the mirav. Murakkam in Malayalam means resonance. So it's a big pot drum, and there are many different sizes based on the size of the temple theatre. So, we have small, medium and very, very big ones. And basically it is a percussion drum, and what is very unique is usually we either have one or two or sometimes three mirava, and one is always playing the basic rhythm, and the other mirava is constantly following the movements of the actors, which is actually like an incredible technique, because it sets an actor like very free. So, an actor can take as much time as they like to elaborate a story, and the music always follows and accompanies. So, you are not restricted by any cycle or any. So, Koodiyattam can go on and on and on, and it's completely up to the actor to decide. And this mirava is very interesting because you don't find it in other traditions. It's very ancient. We have many myths about the mirava, like Banasura in some stories are playing it for Shiva's Tandava. The one very interesting thing about the mirava is also that we traditionally treat it as a living being. So, we have it's a Deva Vadya, and we have Upanyam, and we also, when it's damaged, you have to cremate it, you have to do all the rituals that you would do when a person passes. In the past many centuries, we know that Koodiyattam has been a part of the temple rituals across Kerala in several temples. During the time of the great architect Perindachan, and around his time, the temples in Kerala got very beautiful theatre spaces. But I'm not sure if it existed before, but some of the most beautiful ones are built around that time. And Koodiyattam used to be performed in these temple theatres called Koothambalam. That are specifically constructed for the performance of Koodiyattam, not just all performances, but really for Koodiyattam. So, spatially, acoustically, the distance, the calculations, everything are meant to suit this form. And in temples where Koothambalams did not exist, Koodiyattam and Koothu was still performed in the Veliyambalam, in like close to the sanctum. There were several Chakyar and Nangyar families, like actors, actresses and musicians, who were assigned temples where they are supposed to conduct annual ritual performances, and that was the way actually Koodiyattam is one of the few forms that survived, or like such a long history. So, it became a part of the Adiyandaram, we say, the temple ritual. But we also, like many scholars, are of the opinion that we had a previous existence where a form prior to the way we know it now, where Koodiyattam was also performed in other spaces. But yeah, it has been for for several centuries part of the temple ritual, yes. Temple theatres are beautiful and ideal spaces for Koodiyattam performance, but there are very many restrictions. One, it is not a secular space. There is a limited audience that watches. The shift from performing only within the temple spaces to outside happened around independence, and especially in the 60s, when masters like Paingulam Ramachakyar, followed by Guru Ammanur Madhava Chakyar, made their first steps of performing in other spaces. And also the founding of Kerala Kalamandalam, followed here in Ammanur Gurukulam, was the first time the doors opened to students from outside the community, outside the Chakyar, Nangyar and Nambyar community. That was a huge revolution in Koodiyattam, artistically, creatively, politically, because then there to now, Koodiyattam has seen huge transformations, like good on not so ideal, but still revolutionary changes have happened. So, when the audience becomes secular, when the audience includes women, and women also gain more prominence on stage, even the content and the interpretations have radically changed since the 60s. Koodiyattam is still practiced by a small community, in the sense that we have practitioners from within the Chakyar, Nangyar and Nambiyar communities. Parallelly, we have almost a similar number of practitioners from other communities who came into the art because they were interested. And now everybody works together, and we are very few. Like, I think a few years ago, the Koodiyattam Kendra did like a census kind of a thing, and we found that including costume makers, makeup artists, musicians, actors, everybody included, we are only about 100 people. And so there are a few schools of Koodiyattam, like Kerala Kalamandalam, Birava Kalari, Nepathya, Margi, Ammanur Gurukulam. These are the few major, Koodiyattam schools. And the thing about Koodiyattam is you can only exist in a community. It's not a form that you learn and you can go away somewhere and practice it on your own, but you have to be a part of an ensemble in some way, at least connected to an ensemble, to be able to practice and perform it. And we still are in a phase where everybody is connected to each other. Like, all the schools, all the actors and musicians know each other, and we are like very much, there is that sense of a family. Of course, a family with its, there are problems, there are tensions, and but still there is a feeling of, very much a feeling of interconnectedness, which I think is very, very beautiful at this stage. I mean, every Koodiyattam practitioner, I think, post independence have made radical changes. Like, Paingulam Ramachakyar was like one of the pioneers in making like big changes. He changed the costuming, and he also started to make new productions outside of the traditional repertoire. He is the one who included students, first person to include students from a different community. Then Guru Ammanur Madhava Chakyar was a little bit junior to Paingulam. He also like followed that, and he also like was very involved in the revival of Nangyar Kuttu, the female storytelling tradition. Then there came like a whole generation of very strong female practitioners, Kalamandalam Girija, Kalamandalam Shailaja, Guru Usha Nangyar, Margi Sati, that whole generation of actresses who really made like space for themselves, and they have done their own kind of work, which all contributed to making space for the women. My father's work is very specific. For example, I think Shakuntalam Koodiyattam is one of the first steps in which a female character is like a Adyavasanam, like a lead throughout the play. Then he did Vikram Urvashiyam. Again, like it's Urvashi is not just an object of love, but she is like in that play an actress, like a professional actress who is sent down from heaven because of a work problem. So it's really deals with her profession as an actress as much as it does with the love story of Urvashi and Pururavas. And then in Urubhangam, the Gandhari became like a very strong and powerful character, which is very different from the original text. Studying with Ammanur Ashan, of course, it came with a lot of, you had your own pressure because somebody so great is actually making time for you. But he himself had a very organic way of teaching. And I think I was to an extent a good student because I was aware of, you know, the importance of this opportunity and this privilege. I would, like, if he told me once, I would listen. Like, I didn't have to be constantly prodded. In his class, with my father it was different, but in Ashan's class, if he said bend down, I would bend down. If he said lift your elbow, I would do it. If he corrected something, I would remember it. But he himself was never like, you know, strict in that sense, never aggressive, very kind, very generous. And it was, the class was also not like intense 3 hours or anything, like it would be 1 hour or 1.5 hours of doing something, but also like half an hour before, half an hour after, storytelling, talking. The most beautiful memory of my life would be like every day at around 10 o'clock, I'll go to Ashan's house. He won't be there. He would have gone with his cow to the paddy fields that side. So I'll go looking for him and he'll be there with his cow, sometimes talking to his cow. Then I be with him there. We start talking, slowly walk back to class. Then I'll wait for him in class and he'll come. We have some class, again talk, and only by lunch I come home. So those mornings were like so beautiful, like just being in the paddy with him and like with the cow, and sometimes it was just, and he took care of his cow like it was his child, you know, like really you should, just this Ammanur Ashan bathing his cow, it's like he would scrub like the hooves and like really so carefully, so meticulously, and his life revolved around the schedule of the cow, you know, like the cow's daily routine. It was very simple life, very beautiful times. I think the last few years of his life, we didn't really have many classes, but you know, because he had developed dementia, we were mostly just caring for him and being with him. I can't really remember when that began and when the classes began to stop happening. Because we never felt like, until he passed, we all, like he was like the sun in our lives, like everything revolved, like all of us, all disciples, we had, you know, like the rising sun to look at. With him it was always surrender and always like so respectful that we never felt like something had stopped or the learning had stopped. It was always there. I think I would have studied with him really intensely maybe for 5-6 years or 7 years, I think. I think the disciplinarian in my life was definitely my father. The physical discipline had to do, I had to learn kalari, and those used to be early morning classes, which I am not an early morning person. It was torture to wake up and practice kalari in the morning. More and more I begin to feel like I'm an extension of my father. I mean, I look like him, and I'm basically, more and more, the older I grow, I feel like I really am like a, you know, very similar. One of the most strongest influences aesthetically is my father from childhood. But not only that, you know, he was also the first person to like sow the seeds of many things in my life, like feminism. He used to be a great storyteller when I was a child especially, and he would tell me many stories, and many stories would be like Kathakali stories, the story itself or him going to watch. He's traveled all over India to watch like different traditions and rituals. He would tell me all these stories about that, but he would constantly tell me stories of great women. He would tell me about Indrani Rahman, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Kapila Venu, like many great women. And he would, as a child, he would always like, never put yourself lower than the men around you. And he was always trying to push me to be a leader, like in the sense, like he said, just you have to fight for your space in a room full of men. So this he put in me, like even when I started traveling, he would be like, you know, you have to be careful, like men around you are not safe. Like he was very much in awe of powerful women, I think, and he wanted me to be one as well. And same with like being, you know, to coexist with nature. That was something I actually also learned from from him from childhood. Like he would always like show me the little insects. These are like memories from like when I was a baby or a toddler, like just paying attention to like Koodiyattam, the little insects or little animals, the snakes. So all of this also, like it's a lot of that comes from him. I think we still haven't stopped being a teacher and student. So I very much now I think I'm again learning a lot, trying to learn as much as I can. A lot of my repertoire, the most important or the most successful pieces rather, have been collaborative works with my father. So he would write a script, I would work on it, I would show it to him, and then something would come. And most of my most important pieces like Sita Parityagam, Narasimhavataram, Kurmavataram, and all those experimental pieces, Soundar Lahari, everything we have done together. And also like whenever he's choreographing a new play, like I'm usually always involved, and he always makes a point to make sure that the female characters share at least equal space, if not more. So that was actually a radical change in the Koodiyattam repertoire, starting from Shakuntalam. And even now, like anything I do, I still need his outside eye. I don't always accept, we also have like our differences of opinion, but I know that if I show it to him, he will have like really important things to contribute. So that is still the same. One aspect of Koodiyattam that I really appreciate is that through the process of performance, ritual is very important. So, because Koodiyattam used to be a part of the temple theatre, we have ritual that for every stage of the performance. And what's beautiful about ritual is that, it's like a safety net. It holds a certain formality, a certain seriousness, a certain legitimacy to every stage in the process. If you ask me what is a performance, I think it's like performing a ritual, like a yaga with all sincerity, every step of it, every action that you perform it like a ritual sacrifice with, as much devotion and sincerity. How do you enter a performance in Koodiyattam? We have a very prescribed, specific way of doing it. So, on the day of the performance, you bathe with your hair and everything, and you must first go, if your teacher is in the vicinity, you must first go and meet your teacher and take their permission. You say, I'm going to perform, and you do namaskara. Then you must also ideally meet the chief organizer of the performance and inform them that you are now going to start the preparation for the performance, which is also a way to say that, okay, now my only responsibility is to perform, and your responsibility is to make sure everything else is taken care of. So then the organizer must say that yes, please go, and it is done in front of a lamp, and it's a formal exchange. Then you go to the green room, and you must actually ideally also take permission from all musicians and co-actors, and you light a lamp in the green room, and you light a lamp on the stage as well. The stage lamp is also lit, which again makes sure that from the moment, this is several hours before the performance, the privacy of the space or the sanctity or the energy of the space is conserved. So you don't, once you light a lamp, you don't like cross around, you don't walk around on the stage, and in the green room you maintain a certain discipline. Then we have the next big ritual, which is called Taleil Kattaga. You have a ribbon, like a red band, with prayers, you tie it on your forehead, which marks that you are now ritually exempt from everything that concerns you in your mundane daily life. So ritually you are not tied to familial bonds, in the sense that if there is a death, olden days there used to be the thing of pollution like Valaima, Pella. But once your band has been tied, you will not even be informed of this until the performance is over. Similarly, you are excluded from social hierarchy. So once you tie the headband, you are not obliged to respect anybody who enters the green room. Even if the king came or an important person came, you're not obliged to, talk to them or greet them or anything. You are now allowed to be completely immersed in your world of preparation for the performance. Then you start the face makeup, and then you have the makeup artists who help you, step by step get ready. And the final step is to put on the headgear, at which point the full transformation into the character is complete. Then you go on stage, you perform. Eventually, when you finish, as soon as you come off from the stage, you have to immediately remove the headgear together with the chopuni, which again signifies that this is over, is completely over, which means all the privileges that you had, like exemption from social hierarchy, exemption from all of that has disappeared. So has your connection to the character and all of that as well. So it's ritually disconnecting you from your character, from your duties as a performer to go back into life. Most of us still follow this path because as an actor, especially in Koodiyattam, you play characters who go through very intense emotional journeys, and from childhood you are trained to connect and disconnect and not to carry anything outside of either the classroom or outside of the green room. Guru Ammanur Mother Chakyar, he was incredible. He had, spiritually also, of course he's very human, and of course he loves appreciation and all of that. But soon after a performance, I've noticed, even when great people come up to him and say that you were great, he was always so detached, and he would say, it's all Jagadishwaranda Kripa. He would just give all credit. He would not take it. He would always say, I'm a vessel. That is also a great tool because you're not also responsible for the outcome. There is only so much that a human performer can do. We can do our best, but really for it to work, I feel that it's beyond us. He was always like that. And he was always very careful that for example, if he watched a performance and you went to meet him the next day, he wouldn't say anything. And then of course, sometimes he'll tease you and he'll ask you, Lisa, how was it? And if you say, oh, it was good, then he'll make sure he'll cut out, he will destroy that feeling by telling you. But eventually, you went and you hung around for a bit and hoping he would say something. And if he didn't say anything, not good. But if he criticized you, that was a great compliment, which meant, okay, it was worth watching, whatever you did. Unfortunately, a lot of the spaces that are available for performance are prosceniums. And prosceniums are not the ideal spaces. But I'm also not proposing that the Koottambalam is the only ideal space. But I do see a possibility of creating, even temporarily, or paying more attention to make a certain ambience that suits the performance. Most prosceniums, in the context of Koodiyattam, it's completely not ideal because the stages are very high and they are meant for large gatherings, and Koodiyattam is really meant for a low stage, people sitting very close, ideally on the floor. But if they are sitting on chairs, the height of the stage must be adjusted because it's meant to be watched very intimately, very closely. So often you do find spaces that are adaptable. So you do find smaller studio theatres that are very beautiful. You can have a black box that can be altered to suit your needs. We have to pay much more and more attention to creating a certain ambience that could even be under a highway bridge, I feel, or that could even be like in most alternative spaces, but really to pay attention to certain needs that a performance requires, because we use our own voice and we can't be mic'd because we are moving, and it doesn't work like that. And so it's definitely the most unideal space to perform. Once almost all traditional art forms move out of their spaces, we have had other priorities. We have had the priority of, making our art accessible, to going out there and, doing whatever we can in whatever space. But I think now we are coming to the end of that phase. And now we really have to pay more attention to each art form, its needs, and more subtle and more nuanced way of watching, which includes space. So we really need to think more deeply about every space where we go. I try my best, like already when somebody proposes, the first question would be like, where is the space? What is the strength of the audience? So if they say it's like 3,000 or 1,500, like I always inform that this Koodiyattam doesn't work for that kind of an audience. So I would, to my best ability, would avoid such spaces. But there are instances when I do perform for a large audience, like a Spikmake convention, because then there is other things that you have to prioritize, the intention of the movement, and when there are that many people, like how can we avoid a certain large chunk of the audience. And so that I do have instances where I perform for a large audience, but given my way, I always try to look for a smaller audience, a better space that suits my presentation. Now that I've been doing it for a lot of years, I think there are several moments where I've felt like a performance has transcended me, in the sense this is beyond me, or some kind of magic happened. And I don't know exactly how and why that happens, but looking back, there have been certain spaces where I feel like, like for instance, there is this one theatre in Japan. It's an oval-shaped wooden theatre. It's very small. I think the seating capacity is around 150. And it's designed by a very important theatre director, Suzuki-san. And I've performed there consecutively for 4 or 5 years, year after year. And it's been incredible, because we also used to have Andakriti Kutambalam. So it was, I don't know, that association, or it really felt very like powerful, the energy there. Recently I was in Calcutta, and the venue was the Alipur Museum, which used to be a jail. I was performing a piece called Shaiva Kootu, Karekalammayar, and they actually built a stage for me under a banyan tree. There was the prison wall, and beyond that there was a mosque. Again, it was very surreal experience for me, because just as they moved the curtain, there was this thing from the mosque, the azan. I was so charged through the whole performance. It was for me just so incredible. Similarly, in Chottanikara temple in Kerala, it's a temple for mental health. And a lot of people with mental health challenges come there or brought there for their relatives. And I had one performance like that in front of the sanctum, and a lot of the audience were people who were slightly challenged. But again, it was just the energy, because they have this very pure bhakti, and everything, they come to this temple looking for something, and they were watching the performance with some kind of incredible like openness. Again, it was just that experience I'll never forget. I've always felt the need to go away from my practice and do something completely different. When I go out, I either do theatre, or I've sometimes done film, or I went to Japan many years consecutively to practice with a Bhutto master. Any kind of an engagement with something completely different. After my father and my Guru Ammanur Madhava Chakyar, I think the third most strongest life-changing influence in my life is my master, Tanaka. He's a legendary dancer, farmer, teacher from Japan. And he is the disciple of one of the pioneers of the Buto movement, Hijikata-san. So Min-san comes from that lineage. And my encounter, or like my meeting with Min-san was completely like coincidental. I had never heard of him before. We were touring in Japan, and I just incidentally, one of our performances were in this festival called Dance Hakushu. And like after several performances, and I had previously injured my voice the previous night, so we arrived at this place, and it was like a very, it was lots of nature, and immediately I could feel like, oh, this place is like really special, like something is so different. And because I didn't have to perform that day, I was just like spending my time like looking around, and I found like there were all these people who were always working. So some of them looked like farmers, many of them were just, I don't know, I didn't know at the time what they were, but they were digging, they were living in tents, and they were building and cooking and serving, and there was like everybody was doing something. It didn't look like an audience that came to watch. But I felt like there was a very strong sense of community, and I knew that something was in place. And later I learned that this was a community who practiced farming and were dancing, and they were held together by this person called Min Tanaka. And my first experience of watching Min-san's performance, it was on the roadside by the paddy field. And I was just so moved, like I could feel like trembles, and I'm usually very shy, and back then even more, like to talk to somebody, like especially if somebody of a very great presence. But I remember after his performance, I just went up to him, and I was like, I was like so in awe, and I was like, can I come and live here? Can I be a part of this? And then he actually responded like, yes, we can talk about it. And then I left. Then a few months later, I actually received a letter, an email from the commune saying, Min-san is planning this new production. It's called The Rite of the Forest. Would you like to be one of the 10 dancers? And would you have to train with him for months? And again, I had these trembles, and then it was a huge thing to allow everybody to set me to go there. But that was my first trip to Japan, and I was a part of that first production called Rite of the Forest with 10 dancers. And then I just went back year after year, and I studied, and I lived, I farmed. I spent a lot of time there in, just being around Min-san and trying to learn as much. And I performed again in another of his choreographies. And like that, and then we toured together. In the sense, I toured with him in India and Tamil Nadu. And so that, it was a very strong, many years of that, lots of exchange, but really me receiving a lot of his wisdom. And I think that has just been life-changing, not just as a performer, because he was the first person who literally showed me, by example, that one's practice and one's life is not separate, And by dance, he meant all kinds of artistic practice it's not a profession, it's not that, it is very much a part of one's being, and that's how you need to live. See, I think what I learned from Min-san is life wisdom. Once I started to travel to Japan and spend time there each year, a little bit into that process is when Ashan Guru Ammanur Madhava Chakyar Ashan passed. And Min-san had met Guru Ammanur Ashan once, and they had, it was an exchange with not many words, but it was a huge moment for me when two great masters of mine had this, short exchange, were in each other's presence. And then by the time I went to Japan again, Ammanur Ashan had passed. And therefore, I feel like Min-san really understood the bigness of my loss. And I also remember overhearing him telling other people around, okay, this is a big moment for Kapila. And for me, it was almost like the universe had brought like this other person to, so that I had somebody to surrender, like, you know, to look up to, and like to really hold that space for me, which he did. He was in a very affectionate, not in an expressive way, but like he really was for several years after also the strongest presence in my life. In Giganess, I think we were an ensemble of 7 dancers and 7 musicians, and all of us, except of course Akram Bhai, were very rooted in their tradition kind of practitioners. The whole beauty of Giganess, I think, it was really a lot in the process where we shared the way he kind of wove this fabric of Giganess together with these beautiful threads seamlessly. That was the whole process and a huge learning for me. Like, I don't think if you watched Giganess, you would say that, oh, Koodiyattam, or oh, this piece or that piece. But he really, with every attention to every detail musically and choreographically, he brought us into this grand storytelling with material that we had come in with, but the material disappeared and somehow like into the canvas. It was a huge learning, and it was also for me very interesting and challenging, because I'm mostly a solo performer and I more identify as an actor rather than a dancer, and I was around these fabulous master dancers rhythmically and like fast and furious. So I had to find a way of like existing in that space. And I also felt like on many days, like, because when I perform on my own, I'm in control and everybody's following me. I have to throw myself completely in with a lot of faith, but everybody else too. And then we have to work together. And that was like very interesting. A lot of people are used to that, but I'm not at all used to that. Like, I'm used to holding like an independent control. But this was like, the first performance, I remember, like, it was so profound. I was so worked up, you know, and I was so like nervous. And once it was over, I was just uncontrollably in tears, because I saw the magic in that surrender, but I also knew that I was so not used to that. So yeah, it was a beautiful experience, and we had so much fun, like touring together. And I don't think anybody held their own space. I think we all held space for each other, and we really did become a part of a whole. A filmmaker called Sanju Surendran, who later now is a very good friend of mine. And he is somebody who's like, his journey thus far was very strongly influenced by Mani Kaul, and through Mani Kaul's films and connections, also Drupad. And with that on his mind a lot, Koodiyattam is something that really moved him. And he says, like, he watched a performance of mine. It's a very funny story. He watched me performing Lalita of Shurpanakangam. In Koodiyattam, it's a very powerful thing. But he also was like, he said, Kapila, you were so into it. This he later told me, your nose was bleeding. And then he said, like, that moment I realized, like, I have to make a film on this. But you know, actually I had been through a nose surgery like the previous week. We always laugh about it, but that was the reason why my nose was bleeding. But anyway, so then he was so drawn to the form, and he said, I want to make a film on Koodiyattam, is what he told me. And he said, I want to see it through your eyes. And I said, okay. And And then we shot a lot at different times in the whole year. Like we were shooting a lot. He was like in my house a lot. And I just got used to it. And we also became really good friends. And eventually the film came out and it was a lot about me. And I was like, oh God, everybody's going to think, this is not a good idea. But yeah, that's how Kapila happened. But it was very interesting to watch my life from the outside. Because he had some of the scenes were like very mundane things of like me doing my emailing, or in Kochi, like I also partially live in Kochi, and like, so just me being in the city. Then the film kind of made me conscious of this juxtaposition that he had very deliberately done, this very contemporary person and a very ancient art form, and I became very aware of it, and sometimes I still become aware of it, and it kind of, those are moments like when I feel like, oh my God, I'm practicing a language, a vocabulary that someone like hundreds of years ago had like formulated a certain gesture to mean something. And imagine the privilege that language got passed on and on and on. And then I can learn it so well. Like maybe a lot of things were lost and a lot of things came in, but it's still quite intact, this vocabulary, this whole knowledge system. Sometimes it actually blows my mind. I become emotional when I think of it, like, oh, what a privilege it is that this language gets passed on from our past, and I can still pass it on to somebody in the future. I think it's since COVID that my engagement with film and filmmakers became more frequent. So during COVID, I actually acted in a short film, and then in 2 feature films. And then I was a part of as a director of traditional performance, is a part of a very big film called The Cloud Messenger, which was a long process of working, choreographing, and the film used a lot of traditional forms like Theyyam, Kathakali and Koodiyattam. And it is a film that goes through several worlds. So some of the characters that are slightly divine or supernatural were performed by traditional performers. The director of the film is Rahat Mahajan, and it's like a 3-hour long film, fiction, experimental, but that was a long engagement with filmmaking. And then I met a very close friend who later became a very close friend of mine, Naveed Mulki. And this is our 3rd film together, Devanam Piya. I've noticed in the last few years especially that I'm very much interested, just out of interest, it's not for anything else, but I watch a lot of like good films, and I'm very interested in the medium. I'm very drawn to it, and I actually love acting for the camera, and I love a good frame. I love a good film, and every time I've engaged with film, whether it's like feature or otherwise, I've enjoyed adapting towards how we can try to work with the camera. And so I feel Devanam Piya is, again, it's a film that has taught me a lot of things. It was made for the Edict project, and it's based on Professor Nayanjot Lahiri's book Ashoka in Ancient India. And of all the different ways of looking at Ashoka, I felt like Ashoka, like as Professor Nayanjot mentions, he seems to have been a person who was very swayed by the influence of the women in his life, and those women seem to be very strong, like his mother, who really had to go through this journey to get, like support him on his way to the throne. And he has several partners, but his chief queen consort, Asandhimita, who is like together with him in his practice of the Buddhist Dharma. And then he has this very interesting other wife who's like this manipulative and slightly dark. Not slightly, she's actually very dark, Tissaraka. And then finally also his daughter Sanghamitra. So we basically looked at all these women, and we were telling Ashoka's life through these women. But we've just basically tried to experiment with like film and movement and light. But yeah, it was very interesting, and I am very curious to learn more and more about filmmaking. Just being a woman in the world of traditional performing arts is still quite a daily challenge to navigate, to be in alignment with your values, your beliefs about, gender and equality and things, and still be respectful of everybody else and their legacy, and also be empathetic about why they cannot understand some things. So it's a very complicated navigation. I think the other difficult moment was definitely trying to balance motherhood in the early years of having had a child. It was very difficult because I was so used to just be in control of my time. Like, my time was mine, but then it's not anymore, and I wasn't prepared, and nobody told me how difficult it is. Because I'm an only child, I've never really grown up with other kids, and I had no idea. Then over the years, you actually find a way to do it, so that now I don't feel it's a challenge anymore. The other very important challenge that many of us forget to mention is what you open your whole being, your senses and everything to embody all these characters and everything. That makes you also like somehow soft and vulnerable as a person. And then if you don't have the tools to protect your mental health, it can be very challenging, exhausting, especially if you're like back to back on tour and you have to show up on, you can't just say no to a performance. Once you've committed, you have to do it in any given condition. And so all of these things, I feel like students today have to be equipped from a young age, and how to deal with all of these complications, and also how to cultivate a certain sense of detachment from work. And I never want to position myself in the sense that, okay, I'm a guru, or I am a representative, or that I'm an authority. So I have learned what I have learned, I have imbibed what I have imbibed, and I do what I do, and I will continue to do what I do. I don't want to put myself in a position of like unquestionable authority, or any kind of authority. No labels, and I feel like, I always want to learn and grow and discover and just keep going.